Hello and welcome to the West Ham Breakdown with me, Jack Elderton, and my mate Cal Goodall. It feels like it's been a while for me. I don't know. You guys must have been chaos reigns in my absence. No, I'm sure you smashed it. But we haven't been doing too well as a football club in the interim. So I haven't missed a bad period.
He's been on strike.
Yeah, not quite. Just really unwell with norovirus, which has been great fun. But yeah, back, and I was going to say back with a bang, but unfortunately just short of that, thanks to Virgil Van Dijk, a 2-1 defeat to Liverpool. Bit of a mixed one. There are lots of positives though, I think, to take out of this one, and I think a lot of the feeling after the game was very positive. Potter spoke about it being what he thought was one of the best. I think he said it was the best performance so far since he's been here. That he was happy with the balance of attack and defence. Felt that was at its best so far, and I think really when you look at the performance in the second half away at Anfield, I suppose I would have to agree. I thought we played incredibly well in that second period.
Yeah. I mean, even just at the sort of surface level, to go away to Anfield, and if you look at the second half alone, away at Anfield, 61% possession, it's crazy. That sounds sort of unheard of, especially with the current form that Liverpool are in. And they didn't look. Yeah, it's not one of those where it's like they were 3-0 up and they were happy to sit off. It was still on a knife edge. They were still trying, but we were just outdoing them, really. It wasn't like they were, just passively like, West Ham aren't posing any threat. They quite clearly were threatened. I think you see that in the game. Lots of frustration, lots of mistakes being made, but largely from us sort of putting them under such pressure, which I think, is really impressive and a good sort of building block to look to the future from, I think, in terms of the levels that we could hope to reach once certain changes have been made and stuff. Largely promising, but obviously also still plenty of disappointment as well.
Yeah, I know that was immediately what I was going to go on to, is if we're going to talk about the game, we can't just speak about the second half. The first 25-30 minutes were a very different story when
it was not good. Yeah, it wasn't good. We got absolutely peppered. I think the first half on the whole really was fairly dominant for Liverpool, but as you say, that first half an hour, woof. we looked lost. We looked lost out there. Lots of confusion. I think I don't want to single anyone out, obviously, but I think there was certain players in certain roles that maybe, I'm just going to say it. Scarles looked like he was struggling in that first half an hour, but Scarles against Salah is always going to be a real challenge, right? So it was unfortunate for him, I think. But across the board, I think a lot of players just looked like they were uncomfortable doing what they'd been asked to do. And I think you see a lot of tweaks made throughout the game that sort of push us back towards a place of comfort almost. Players looked like they were much more happy in the post changes, should we say. But yeah, I also think Liverpool just turned up and were
that's what I was going to say.
Fire, right? Like they just turned up and were up for it.
I think sometimes it can be a little bit too easy to think about it just through the lens of like, what did we do? How did we set up? And what was right? What wasn't right? I think Liverpool were really impressive in the in that first half an hour. I think the way they reacted to some of the issues that we posed, because we weren't completely hopeless. Like we did some things quite well. I think the way that we set about pressing, asked questions, and it made it difficult at times for them to actually play through at the beginning of the game, sort of first 10 minutes, and their response to that to start to go more direct into the wide players. There were lots of diagonal balls out to Salah. There were also long balls over the top targeting Luis Díaz, and I think when they were able to mix in the way that they did, playing short, drawing the press, and then going long, almost akin to kind of Bournemouth Iraola. That caused us a lot of problems, and then I think the confidence in our group with the ball dipped off a lot, and we saw the press that Liverpool had become so much more successful, and we weren't really able to possess the ball for any length of time. Every single time we won it, it was kind of 1-2 passes. Then we would try to look long towards Kudus or Bowen as a way to get out and avoid losing the ball in a bad area ourselves. And we kind of got into this kind of endless counter pressing cycle against Liverpool, where they're possessing the ball in the final third, and then as soon as you win it, because you're winning it around your own box or so close to your own goal line, they're actually latching onto things around the edge of the box, or they're pressing in such an effective way and swarming around the ball in such an effective way that centre backs are being forced to look long to Bowen and Kudus. And I think that any striker in the Premier League really struggles with the hold-up work against Virgil van Dijk and Ibrahima Konate, and when you're playing with two wingers who are playing as sort of converted emergency strikers, it becomes much more challenging. So I think that became the kind of feel of the match, and we really struggled to kind of change that feel. And a lot of that actually for me was about just showing a little bit more confidence with the ball. So the big moment I think had a real change in the first half, because I think the final 15 minutes of the first half was so much better than the first half hour. There was just one moment where Mavropanos probably did something I wouldn't advise, which was let the ball run across him on the edge of his own box in the D, right? And he turned on the ball without checking what was behind him. And there wasn't any pressure, and he was able to roll out, play forwards, and I think that was just a moment which translated to a lot of the rest of the team, which is like, well, okay, yeah, Liverpool are playing very well here, but we can take the ball and pass it and play short, and we were able to sustain for even it was less than a minute, but there were a couple of short passes between Ward-Prowse, Paquetá went back into the defence, and then we kept the ball then, and Kilman went back out to Paquetá rotated deeper, and we were able to just play. Must have been 12, 15 passes, and it just felt at that moment suddenly there was like, oh, okay, we don't have to just lump it into Bowen and Kudus every single time, and that can really help us to change the feel and show a little bit more control with the ball. A little bit of credit as well goes to Ollie Scarles, who, of course, you're absolutely right to bring up, massively struggled in the first 25 half hour, could not cope at all with the direct balls out to Salah. We've spoken before with Scarles about the high ball and long balls being particularly an area of concern. Its timing is not always correct, and it really wasn't here. But I do think as the game went on, lots more confidence, started to win a few of those duels, won a really good tackle in our own penalty area against Salah. Just that coming up a little bit of a level from where it started, which was basically anytime the ball went out to Salah, we knew we were in a situation where they were going to create a shot. Also really, really helped us stabilise.
I think
let's just go on.
No, I was just going to say as well, really pleasing as well, right? Like it could have been quite easy for Scarles to just drop his head and sort of, after that first half an hour, feel super deflated. And I think at times, like facially and sort of body-wise, he did look quite deflated. But the fact that, as you say, he then found it within himself in those final 15 minutes of the first half to step his levels up instead of sort of go into a shell, which would have been absolutely catastrophic, because had he done that, I imagine they might have scored one more before the break, and then it's a completely different game, right? But yeah, I think to sort of keep his chin up, still try and defend against Salah. Obviously, everyone this season has struggled defending against Salah. Yeah. He's been in absolutely inspired form. So I think for him, yeah, it's pleasing. I was very pleased with how he responded within that first half, and also just it's going to be good for his growth. Like that is the biggest test of his career today, and possibly of his career in the next few years, because it's hard to imagine, even if he stays in the Premier League, that he will come up against a winger who is in better form than Mohamed Salah is this year. So to have that sort of test so early in your career can only be a good thing as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I mean, I have it on the notes for the pods, and this is no disrespect to Wes Burns, but the step up to some of the weaker wingers in the Premier League, or some of the less impactful wingers in the Premier League this season, from the level that he was playing at just last season is ginormous. Never mind the step up to playing against Mohamed Salah, who's been the best player in the league this season, and close to, if not the best player in the world this season. So yeah, I think it's really difficult for anyone to play against him. I think it's also very difficult when your style, as it has been for Scarles so much of the time since he's come into the team, is to be so aggressive, is to be so front-footed, and to attack off the first contact, and to try and be there either to intercept or to win the physical duel as the ball comes into the winger. If that goes wrong, it's pretty bad against most players. If it goes wrong against someone with the speed and talent and instincts of Mohamed Salah, it it does look catastrophic, and we see that for the goal, right? The first goal for Liverpool is just a perfect example of that, where he tries to attack the contact, just gets the timing completely wrong, and Salah's able to roll, and actually the drift is pretty good from Mavropanos onto Todibo, but when you can pass like that off the outside of your foot to the opposite side of the box, there's just nothing really that anyone can do, and that is the quality that Salah brings to Liverpool. And when he plays like he did in that first half, that's the thing really that has elevated Liverpool to be in the position that they are at this stage of the Premier League, where they could win it next weekend, although I think it's very likely that they will win it the weekend after. After that, we talk a little bit more about the first half and exactly how, in fact, that goal happened, and that comes really from actually the success initially of our press, which was we were stepping up into a 4-4-2 shape. That saw Wan-Bissaka come up into the midfield. We saw one of Soler or Ward-Prowse moving forward onto Gravenberch as the single pivot for Liverpool, and sometimes splitting between Gravenberch and McAllister, when McAllister would drop in there to try and help out in deep build-up as well. The other one would sit deep and stick with one of the 10s, and then we often saw one of the centre-backs jump out to join the other 10. And Paquetá slid across to left midfield, so you had Paquetá kind of coming out to Conor Bradley, and Wan-Bissaka coming out to Kostas Tsimikas, and then the two strikers out to the centre-back. So it's really quite an aggressive setup. The only player really that should have had any time on the ball was Alisson. And I think we felt that in the first half. I think Liverpool felt that there was some kind of immediate pressure on anyone that was receiving in deep build-up. There are two things that go wrong. One, which we've already spoken about, which was Scarles attacking the first contact and not winning it on numerous occasions. And another thing that went wrong, which was on the other side, where Jean-Clair Todibo covering the wide zone behind Wan-Bissaka. There's been a lot of comment on Scarles, but that went horrendously wrong all game.
Yeah, it wasn't good. And it was disappointing as well, really, because I think prior to him arriving at West Ham, and even sometimes this season, I was very much of the opinion that he was quite a good sort of defender in terms of covering that wide space. I think we often thought that he would be able to do a pretty solid job as a wide centre-back in a back three. And as I say, we've seen him do that. But yeah, in this particular instance, it really didn't go to plan. I think he only won 3 of 7 ground duels in the game, and that's not even factoring in the aerial duels as well, because I don't think any of those were good. If we're talking about sort of defending long balls and being able to pick up if Wan-Bissaka's caught a little bit far upfield, I don't think he contested aerials well at all.
He didn't even contest half of them. I mean, more than half. He didn't even try on so many of them. Very weird performance, I thought. I get this a challenging role, right? Because you're starting as a sort of wide centre back, and then as soon as Wan-Bissaka goes each time, you're kind of really becoming a right back in the pressing shape. And you have to kind of drift across quite aggressively, but you don't want to do it too aggressively that Luis Díaz can immediately just run inside you and you get beaten by that ball in between yourself and Mavropanos. So getting all the timing is quite difficult. Also, I think Liverpool really manipulated well with the diag. So instead of actually coming round to play to that side where the timing can feel a little bit more natural, they were just, as soon as Wan-Bissaka went, you just had Konate just going bang straight over the top of the lot, which was really challenging, I think, because you're probably a little bit too narrow. You're arriving at with speed, probably a half second too late, which immediately puts the winger in a really good position, advantageous position to be able to dribble you, which did happen on several occasions. So I get that it's a difficult job, and Liverpool found the timing to make it even more difficult. But I think I still expect a little bit better in those individual duels, and it's just a little bit disappointing that we're sat here having this conversation in April about a player that I think should really be up to the level by now and making a big impact in every single game that he plays in, because really on paper he should be one of the better players in the squad. Should be one of the more talented players in the squad, and actually for exactly what you're just talking about before he came to West Ham, this is what we thought, etc., etc. For exactly this sort of job, we should really be able to hang our hat on Todibo doing that very well. That is his thing, being very dominant in the tackle and being a really good defender of wide spaces. So it's a I wouldn't say it's a concern or whatever. I would just say at this point I feel a little bit disappointed that we're having this conversation now, that we don't feel that we've got that 100% confidence in relying on his ability to do that, nor really complete a game with the level of fitness that he's been able to find across the season. My hope is that for him and for Niclas Füllkrug, that just having a pre-season and starting afresh might give them a new lease of life coming into next season, because both of them have shown in moments just how talented they are this season. They've just never really found any level of fitness, form or consistency across the season to be able to become a really dominant high impact player for West Ham. I think that's a good summary of the first half. I don't really want to bang on about too much of the minutiae. We could talk about the midfield selection. If we were to speak about that, I really would only want to briefly focus on how the logic could lead you, or how a process could lead you to picking those three, which to me is quite simple, even if the output is sort of hard to understand at the end, because you go away to Anfield, you would expect Edson Alvarez to be on the pitch. You would really expect Tomáš Souček to be on the pitch as well. But I suppose the feeling is that with the limitations that we have shown in attack across recent weeks, that dual dominance, if you're not going to be able to attack particularly well, is not necessarily as good as being able to possess the ball for periods at Liverpool, which should, in theory, help you to defend and control the match better. Obviously, that backfired for us in the first half, but I think we saw the real idea transpire a lot better in the second period.
Yeah, 100%. I think they were central to how dominate. No, you know what? Sorry, I'm going to say it. How we dominated the second half. I think Paquetá in particular. I think I was really impressed with his contributions in possession. I think his decision making was pleasing, uncharacteristically so. Perhaps he wasn't. There were still a few hero balls, but they were in the moment the right decision. I would say it's when there was often little else on. But I think in terms of circulation, he did a really good job. Equally in terms of helping us progress as well and linking up with the players around him. I also think as well, just in terms of, as you say, or as we said earlier, rather, about sort of the perhaps surprisingly aggressive press away from home at Liverpool. I think whilst obviously Alvarez and Souček are a little bit more robust, I think Salah and Paquetá bring that sort of tenacity and aggression that maybe allows the press to function a little bit better in terms of arriving at the right times rather than arriving a second too late and then getting beat in the midfield, which has quite often been the case, even with Ward-Prowse, really. I think it's quite often that happens with him as well. And you just
frustrating trade-offs, though, aren't they?
Yeah,
such frustrating trade-offs.
We have to make those trade-offs, but I can see the logic behind it. I can see the logic sort of in retrospect, having seen what defensive approach we took. It makes sense to have those profiles in there, I suppose.
So moving on to the second half now, and the only thing we missed from the first half really was that the sort of final flourish led to a Ward-Prowse corner that Konstantinos Mavropanos did incredibly well to not hit the target with. Really frustrating that doesn't hit the back of the net, because it really should. And then also, of course, we have to credit Alisson, who makes a really good save from Salah, and then another really good save from Kudus on one of our very rare breakaway attacks in the first 20-25 minutes. A lot to do with Wan-Bissaka, who had another very impressive game. And if string, I know we've been losing or we haven't won in a while, but Wan-Bissaka has been incredibly impressive in this recent run of fixtures. Never really dropped below an 8 out of 10 in across the last month or 6 weeks now. He's been a hugely impressive player. And he was one of the things that changed in the second half. His change to the left came a little bit later and did really massively improve the balance of the attack. I thought that Sofal and Wan-Bissaka together gave us a lot more balance in the way that we were able to attack down both the right and the left-hand side, where Scarles, I think, struggled a little bit more to build up and attack successfully down the left beforehand. And Wan-Bissaka is so impressive, really, on both sides as a creator of chances recently, which is really brilliant to see, because I think we criticised early in the season after he was brought in as the kind of wing-back solution, thought it doesn't really make sense. He's not someone that's shown a huge amount creatively across recent years, and think of him as more of a defensive fullback. But right now he's showing the full range of ability, someone that's locking down really well in his 1v1, someone that's bursting forward incredibly well, someone that's creating, someone that's progressing, someone that's very incisive. He can whip a ball in off either side of the pitch, which is a really, really great combination of things to have. You mentioned the midfield at the end and being pleased with Paquetá. I think Ward-Prowse really struggled in the first half, but he was much better in the second half, with a just a very slight tweak to the way that things worked, and it felt much more like a diamond. Kudus came and played deeper in more of a number 10 position off of Bowen instead of playing with that front two. I think out of possession, or in transition, that massively protected Ward-Prowse because that central lane to pass through wasn't quite so obvious. So they weren't able to access the centre of the pitch quite as easily as they were in the first half. And actually, in terms of it from an in-possession perspective, the player that you spoke about and Carlos Soler both came into the game so much more in the second half as they were freed up with that central overload, 4v3 in the middle, but in a slightly different way to how you would usually create it. It usually feels more like a 2 and a 2 in a box midfield. It's less often an actual diamond shape, and the diamond shape caused Liverpool huge problems, and they found it very difficult to control both Paquetá and Soler in the second half.
Yeah, it was really impressive, and I think those roles for Paquetá and Soler probably suit them. I kind of think of both of them as being... Yeah, I think when both of them arrived, we sort of had them down as being sort of lateral 8s that are like 8/10-ish, where they're allowed to be aggressive, but they have sort of their sort of zone of area is the half space, right?
Just if you take away the Premier League tactical context of the day, if you just go on like purely on paper, where would they most like to play?
Yeah, 100% that. And I think this having sort of this. I don't want to say security because at times it wasn't because of how good Liverpool pressed, but having that sort of forward and backwards option of Kudus ahead of them and Ward-Prowse behind, it was like they always had an option if they wanted to be sort of progressive and proactive and have the intent to play forward. Kudus was always there. He could always find them. But if it wasn't on, they could always go back and recycle to Ward-Prowse. It wasn't like, oh, we've only got one, so we have to do that. And I think that sort of dynamic, not addition, but tweak, I guess, rather than sort of in the first half where it felt like on occasion we could only go forward and therefore it was direct and long and unsuccessful, or we could only go backwards and then as a result we really struggled to play through because it was always the safe ball every time. And I think that made Liverpool second guess in the second half because they were having to sort of cover both options, and then that the space opens up, right, for them both to sort of have a bit more time on the ball and run forward as well, carry the ball forward.
Yeah, it's a lot to do with Kudus's role and the way that he's able to dismark from the centre-back. So in the first half, it's lateral backwards. And then when you want to go forwards, you've got two forwards pinned to the last line. There's a big gap between your midfield and your front line. You're having to go a little bit more direct with longer passes. Whereas in the second half, you've got Kudus dropping into deep areas. He's kind of got a bit of a free role, so he was able to kind of get away from opposition markers very easily. There was a brilliant little sequence where he dropped extremely deep in the centre of the pitch, rolled away from Gravenberch, and then popped up all the way on the left wing, beat Gravenberch again, and whipped across. And I think that was right at the end of the first half, and that gave kind of maybe the blueprint for what followed in the second half. So yeah, I think that really helped us always find a way to play and a way to evade pressure. A lot to do with really just showing so much more confidence on the ball, though, as well, which is what I spoke about with the story of the first half. I thought the confidence that Mavropanos showed on the ball in the second half, the confidence that Kilman showed to try and progress and break lines, Wan-Bissaka as well, and then just the willingness and the hunger to always get on the ball from the three midfielders, I thought was really excellent. And we don't see it as much as we perhaps should. We haven't seen it as much as we perhaps should this season. But when Paquetá plays like that, you can see why Manchester City were interested for 85 million, because he is really quite a special player when he's in that kind of form.
He was fantastic. He was fantastic, and it's why he's sort of one of those players that, well, he is frustrating. He certainly frustrates me, but it's like you can't help but love him because you know there is that level in there somewhere, and it's just those little... I think they're probably my favourite type of player, right? And it's why they're so frustrating, because it often takes them a little while to get that confidence in a game, but as soon as they get it, it's like they've unlocked a new tier where they've, when like you have to be a certain level of overall to do certain skill moves on FIFA and stuff like that. It's like if you get to a certain level of confidence, like, whoa, I've just whacked out a little drag back, I've just whacked out a little Rabona, and then it's like, okay, yeah, nice, this is fun, this is exactly what I love. But I think what I was most pleased with, which I kind of alluded to in that previous section, was Paquetá became efficient. It felt, which is sometimes like the one downside is like, okay, I love watching you try all these things and these sort of killer passes, and I love you dragging it around and trying to sort of wriggle past a player in tight spaces, but it's often to a point of frustration because he might lose the ball because he tries something too much, or he might fire a pass into sort of space that no one's even thought about running into, because he's sort of playing on a different plane at times, which is a testament to how good he is, but also that means nothing if you're not playing with the players around you, right? But I think in this game, it was like he just seemed to be playing at the right rhythm. It was like it all sort of just clicked for him in the second half. It was like he sort of found the rhythm of his teammates and then just locked in at that level and didn't ever try to go above it, which I think sometimes he's guilty of. And I think that led to what was probably the best performance for me, maybe bar Wan-Bissaka from a West Ham player. I think everything that sort of was good came from either one of those players in some part.
Well, if you want to hear about a third player to join that group who I thought was very, very impressive in the match, then you can join us on Extra Time, the second half of this podcast, patreon.com/Analytics United, first 7 days free. We have been suffering through a couple of months of really terrible West Ham form, but there are some green shoots certainly to take out of this game and some really 100%. Nice things to talk about when it comes to individual performance, which I'm really looking forward to doing on Extra Time. We'll go into more players beyond Paquetá, who obviously we focused on mainly in the main pod, because I think he deserves that level of focus after the performance that he gave, the amount of times that he broke the Liverpool backline, the amount of chances he created. One massive chance for Jarrod Bowen, who I think he does really well. I think he sees the rush from Alisson, and he expects the rush to continue right to his feet. So he goes for the chip, and Alisson sees the rush and cancels the rush and stands up, which to me just points to how unbelievably good Alisson's decision making is in these high pressure moments to give himself the best chance at making a save. Because if he is a yard closer than he was at the point that the shot is taken, which is where he would have been had he not taken that pause in his rush towards Bowen, that goes in. And those are the margins. That's the level. And yeah, much like we say when Paquetá plays like that, it's really hard for any team, even the best team in the league this season, to contain and control. When Alisson plays like that, it's just really difficult to get the ball into the back of the net, bar Andy Robertson and Virgil Van Dijk having a falling out in the penalty area. I really, really thoroughly enjoyed watching the game back and seeing Virgil van Dijk completely ignore Robertson after the mistake, as he screamed Verge repeatedly, and then enjoyed it even more after the goal to win it for Liverpool. And as he's coming back towards halfway, the camera pans across to Robertson, who's shouting Verge, Verge, Verge. And Virgil van Dijk runs straight past him, completely ignores him both times. Which just made me laugh quite a lot. But yeah, I thought impressive save on that occasion from Alisson. And then more broadly with Bowen, I want to move us on to talk about something that I think has been an issue for him when he plays up front, and an issue for us when we lose him out wide, is that run is the run that he makes when he starts on the right. Yeah. And that is where he is so dangerous, when he gets to come inside from that right position. He moved out onto the left back, timed the run perfectly in behind the defence, gets in behind. We just don't see that anywhere near enough when he's forced to play through the middle, which is why I think, we desperately miss having an out-and-out number 9 starting each week, and have desperately missed that across this entire season. And then following on from that, while we lose all of those brilliant runs that help him get into these positions and 1v1s with goalkeepers, we also don't get the classic number 9 runs where Carlos Soler slaps a brilliant ball across goal, and no one's on the end of it. Kudus gets in down the left and tries a cross shot towards the far corner, and Bowen's not there on the end of it. If there is an actual out-and-out number 9 with those fine-tuned instincts, as soon as the ball goes wide, I'm going, and I'm going to be on that last line, and I'm going to be there for any kind of low cross or deflection or rebound off the goalkeeper. I think both of those go straight into the back of the net.
Yeah, certainly. It was the Salah one was the one that stood out for me. I was just almost screaming at the telly. I was like, "Come on, we just created such a good chance." And it's the sort of chance that doesn't even get reflected in the numbers, right? Because no one actually arrives on it. So the numbers don't really paint the full picture, even though the numbers do make us look like we were in the game anyway, which we obviously were. But I think it doesn't reflect the sort of step up that we had in the second half accurately. I think there's a handful of chances that sort of just have disappeared because they never actually became chances. But if you watch it, you're sat there going, as you say, even if I must admit, I kind of left the game. One of my main thoughts was that I just kind of wish Füllkrug had been brought on earlier, because I think it was quite apparent from fairly early on in the second half when things started to go our way. It was just that final sort of link in the chain that was missing for some of these to start going. So yeah, that was a bit of a frustration. Obviously, we don't know why. Maybe he wasn't fit enough to do longer than he did, or maybe Potter was content with the sort of raising of the level that he wanted to let it run out a little bit longer and see if Jarrod would arrive on some of those chances. But I think once you get to the final whistle, you look back and go, damn, if only Füllkrug had been on, and maybe we would have sort of scored a little bit sooner and maybe the game would have gone a different way. But hindsight is obviously always a wonderful thing. But I completely agree. I think you see it in glimpses when Füllkrug is on the pitch, almost instantaneously. It feels like whenever he comes on, it's like, oh, this is what it feels like to have a out-and-out number 9, because it's something that even when Antonio was like at his best, there was days where he would make those movements, but even then it's sort of a lot of it did happen out wide, out to in, and stuff that he was really good at, and we haven't had that sort of archetypal power forward almost, who even in Füllkrug's case
didn't bring it either, because Scamacca loved to hang out on the edge of the box. He never made those runs onto just between the centre backs in the 6-yard box. Put yourself in the best position to just get a tap in. We haven't had a striker like that. Danny Ings doesn't do it. He wants to play off someone. He wants to float into the penalty spot kind of area to finish from there. We don't have that guy that just will go bomb straight through the middle of the box and arrive in that position.
Yeah, I honestly cannot think back to when it was. I can't imagine it was as far back as Andy Carroll, but that's the first person that comes to mind.
I think it probably is like Andy Carroll, Diafra Sakho, Enner Valencia would have made those sorts of runs. But they were more kind of classic 9s.
Yeah, I think what's
and
interesting...
since then, we've played a lot of sort of players who are really great players in different ways and do different things for the team, run channels really well, or link up really well, or operate as good target forwards, or whatever, move wide. But not really someone that does that sort of job for the team. And it's been frustrating, like particularly, at least I think for me, the big frustration I've had across the last few weeks, one of the big frustrations I've had anyway, has been it's certainly been a theme really, that we have created it must be about 4, 5, 6 of that chance where someone has gone down the channel and whipped a ball across the box behind the centre backs, between the centre backs and the goalkeeper, and there's just been no one there, and you just think that just shouldn't happen as often as it does. And for Bowen, that's 4 or 5 goals that Bowen's left out there just by getting the timing not quite. I always think that for him, he, unlike an out and out natural striker, someone who's always played up front, I always think for him, he's always watching to see what happens out wide before he runs. How
so many of his goals were scored when he was playing as a right winger, right? Because he'd wait for the ball to go into the box. Antonio would get a shot off, or Antonio might miss it, and it would bobble up from a defender, and then Bowen would arrive sort of man of the moment on the edge of the box, or where the scraps had picked up.
That's your job.
Because he'd waited and then arrived that half second later. But he's playing up front with those instincts. So it's kind of like he's playing on a delay sometimes. And it's like, damn, you're seconds away, but you're sort of hard-coded to be... Because he's also... His starting position often is obviously, 20 to 30 metres or yards further away from the goal than otherwise he would be when he's playing 9. So he can have those few seconds because the ball's got further to travel to actually arrive at him. So yeah, it's sort of, it's frustrating, of course, but it's kind of just what you get when you play someone who has spent his whole career playing out wide in that number 9 position. And yes, he is prolific in terms of he's a winger that can score a lot of goals, and he is an instinctive finisher, but he's instinctive when it is an instinct, and it's not his instinct to hit the ball from the centre of the 6-yard box because he's never been in those positions. So yeah, it's as I say, frustrating, but I find it difficult sometimes to blame him too much, because I think ultimately it's just I'm at the point now where it can't be a long-term project, because I think we're playing someone who has all the potential to be, or maybe even is really on his day, a world-class right winger in terms of being an inside forward that scores goals and is absolutely exceptional at it, one of the best in the league in that position at doing what he does. And we're trying to play him up front, and it's like we lose so much by not having him out on the right. And I think probably the biggest learning from this Liverpool game is that I think, having now seen that clear as day for a long while, having seen Kudus do a really interesting job as a 10 who can drift either side, and also seeing Paquetá doing a great job as someone who can sort of cover the left but drop into the 10 and also do a bit of a shift at 8, dropping deep. I think we're finally starting to see, if you have that focal point number 9, what West Ham's best front four looks like, right? Because we've arrived at a position where you can now afford to play Bowen in his best position. You've also found a place that Kudus looks like he could thrive in, and find space for Paquetá further upfield, where you sort of limit a lot of the issues that he has when he plays as an out-and-out central player. And then it just leaves that striker, and you've got your 3 most important assets on the pitch in their preferred positions. So sadly, it all sort of hinges on Füllkrug's availability, really, and fitness. But we know that it can work. And I think, as you say, also a green shoot really is the fact that these chances are even happening. It shows that Potter's got his message across, and the players are executing it, and they're putting these chances regularly on a plate, but we're just sort of missing that final person. If you go back and watch, I know Brighton weren't exactly a free scoring team under Potter, but if you watch how a lot of their goals were scored, it was a lot of that sort of getting into those positions and fizzing balls either to the 6-yard box or in that sort of channel between the 6-yard box and the edge of the box. And it would be someone like Pascal Gross who might get on the end of it, or Alexis McAllister. And yeah, I think we're just lacking that final cutting edge at the minute. But
yeah,
promising.
And the frustration from his side will be that everything is recorded and assessed in XG and shots when you're looking at an attack, not from the amount of sort of positive situations that you generate. Which is not to say that we've been an absolutely fantastic attack, but there are some things there that show that with maybe it's simple, isn't it? We don't need to talk around it. With an actual focal point fit firing number 9,
can play 90 minutes.
We might be able to score some goals. It does really become as simple as that. I am going to classic party pooper moment just briefly and say that I would worry about Kudus playing as a 10 with a back 4 behind him rather than a 3. I think the level of risk that he wants to introduce and is good at introducing, and the fact that he's more of a carrier than someone who's going to unlock things with his passing range, with through balls for players and stuff, I think makes him a slightly clashy fit, because I imagine he would want to roll out into sort of the right half space where you've got Bowen wanting to come in there from the right hand side as well, because that's where they would both get their goals. And I still think that those two players, and I think we've seen a lot across the season to back this up, that they're kind of trying to do the same thing, and they're both most effective when they're doing that thing from one area of the pitch. And therefore, if you get both on the pitch at the same time, someone's going to suffer. And that's been that basically every time we play 5-3-2 or variation of 5-3-2, one of them plays well and the other one has to do a bunch of suffering running around to help the other one do well, which, is not really ideal. You should have someone that complements a bit better and can do really well in the conditions that exist while the other one thrives. It's a classic example in this game where Kudus does really well dropping deeper and dismarking and getting to float around and play a bit of a free role, whilst Bowen struggles to be an out and out number 9, because he's not really an out and out number 9. That's not his game. Classic me moment. I apologise, everyone. I wouldn't say it's all completely fixed, but there's some really nice ideas in that can be built on going into next season. If we're much happier with the way that the second half went, I do have a couple of complaints to bring up.
Jack's back, everybody.
With whinging, and the first of those is nothing to do with West Ham. It's more of an Anfield away refereeing complaint, which is that I don't really think that the so-called foul on Paquetá is a foul, but I've never seen that foul or that challenge not be given as a foul in the Premier League. that is always given as a free kick. Player facing their own goal line, anywhere within 20 yards of the corner flag, receives contact to their back that's even remotely, I mean, it doesn't even have to be aggressive. If you just come into a player's vicinity whilst they're facing their own corner flag, and you make any kind of contact with them, hand on the back in any way, players always flop over to the deck in that situation. And there is a very clear precedent in the Premier League that will always be given. And if we stop giving those, I really want to see Ezri Konsa punished about 12 times a season, because he does it all the time. And it gets given all the time, as with loads of other centre-backs and full-backs. Everyone does this all the time, and they always get a free kick. When do you ever see it not given?
I mean, it's hard to disagree. Yeah, it's kind of part of the playbook, right? It's sort of, how do you defend in those scenarios? Is you're taught to do that. Like, it's taught on the training ground that is the right way to do it. Yeah, it was incredibly frustrating. I also was at the Bournemouth game the previous week, where I was getting incredibly frustrated with the referee in that game as well. So I think maybe our levels are just off it. We're just getting a bit fed off of it. But no, right to flag it for sure. I think it's annoying, isn't it? Because I think it might even be one of those where it's like, if it's anyone but Paquetá, because I think he just gets a bit of short shrift with the refs a lot of the time, because he's quite animated when he does go down, and also
he doesn't sell it well either. He does a terrible job of selling it.
Yeah. So I do wonder if there is an element of that. It's kind of like his reputation sort of counts him out of some of those decisions, unfortunately. But that doesn't make it right, obviously. But I think lessons to be learned for him, to be like, come on, if you're gonna do it, as you say, sell it well. Like, let's ham it up in the right ways. But yeah, it was just a silly decision, really. But as you say, away against the big dogs. It's not to stray into conspiracy land, but there's a whole back catalogue of these sort of situations, I would say.
I don't think it's a conspiracy to suggest that when you're refereeing a game at a big stadium, at a team that's pushing for titles, for major honours, that when a 50-50 comes up, you might lean in favour of, well, I'm going to let that one go. Because part of a referee's job is to manage the game and manage a feel of a game and stop it descending into farce. And I think there will always be a feeling in those moments, 85th minute onwards, that if it's a proper 50-50, and I'm not sure whether it is or isn't, that maybe we'll let those go and allow the game to flow in those situations. And unfortunately, that's just cost us massively on this occasion. Still, we could defend the corner so much better.
Yeah.
So I am going to go old man shouts at cloud, everyone. This was shit. I don't like ever watching us concede corners. I really do not like watching us concede corners. I don't mind it if it's a complex set of blocks and runs that we can't track, and someone loses their man or whatever. And something goes in like that. When it's just a big old ball in and everyone's in the right position and it's just about being strong and winning the duel, I find it infuriating when we concede. And that's exactly what happens here. And it's not for the first time with Niclas Füllkrug. I talked to you about it before he signed. I remember having a long conversation with you about Füllkrug, and specifically saying that the one thing I do really worry about is that he cannot defend corners to save his life. I really, really would strongly caution against ever putting him against the opposition's main aerial threat as a man marker, because he is not very good at anticipating the flight of the ball, getting in the right position to make a defensive header. He's very good in the other box, but it just always seems to go wrong for him when he's defending.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I remember the conversation because it kind of came off the back of the fact that for all his issues, Mikel Antonio was actually a very handy player to have in the box on defensive corners, because he did a very good job. He understood his assignment. He was a nuisance and also strong as an ox. So it was like that contact on Antonio, I think probably would have been a very different outcome. But yeah, it's just, I saw a few people discussing whether there was a nudge on Füllkrug and whatever, and I'm sure, yes, maybe there was a nudge, but if that was in the other box...
We're always pushing and shoving at corners, we're always grappling. I never want to see anything like that given as a foul. Exactly. I don't care what end it's at.
If Füllkrug had scored that header and maybe he'd nudged a defender on the back in the other box and it was disallowed, we would be absolutely screwing. So I think there's no... Yeah. It's a non-argument there, and I think, as you say, really, like, not to be too harsh, because I think Füllkrug's been good when we've seen him, but in that specific moment, like, come on, bro, just be stronger. Come on, man. Yeah. Like, or just be a bit more aware as well. Like, at least make it harder. Like, you don't necessarily have to win the duel. Like, it's Van Dijk. I can cut you that sort of slack, but he didn't even really contest it. He didn't even look like he knew what was going on, like where Van Dijk was. And you can't... I mean, if there's one player in the whole league that I probably don't want you to let have a free run, a header, it's probably Van Dijk. So yeah, was thoroughly disappointing after we'd worked so hard to get back into it. And sure, it was an own goal, but it was still our doing to put them under all that pressure.
It would have been ridiculous if we hadn't scored in the second half. We totally deserved to score a goal.
Completely agree. So yeah, just frustrating to see it sort of all just fall back down straight after that, especially being Van Dijk as well, who'd sort of made the cock up with Robertson. So yeah, I'm sure he would have been buzzing. But
it would have been forgiven as well had that header dropped below the crossbar right at the end, which again, it's the second time we've seen Füllkrug pull out just an absurd headed effort from so far out. And strike the bar. And I do feel a little bit for him, because imagine how different the feel would be. Imagine how different the conversations would be about him had those two just dropped a half inch lower than they had, because of two sensational efforts that he's done so well with to even direct, not direct towards goal, but get so much power and direct towards the top corner. Really, so good on both occasions. I think I know they're going to be groans from certain people as I say this, but this conversation about defending corners leads me on to one person and one person only. And I know that a certain tall Czech fella would never have allowed that to happen had he been on the pitch. We rarely win without him. I was very surprised to see him not get on in this game. Though at no point was I really screaming out for him in that second half, because I thought we were playing so well. I think this is such an interesting microcosm of a big question around the road ahead with Tomáš Souček. He's brilliant in both boxes, and he stops so many of those goals by defending those situations so impeccably and so consistently. And he also racks up goals at the other end, gets into positions at the other end to score those. And if he receives the chance that Mavropanos received in the first half, I think that probably goes in.
Yeah.
But we also just never play the way that we did in the second half, show the control that we did, pass the ball around in the way that we did, maintain periods of possession and dominance in the way that we did, if he's there. Because between the boxes, he has nowhere near the impact of players like Lucas Paquetá, James Ward-Prowse and Niclas Füllkrug.
I think that's it, right? I think where you've arrived is where I'm at. It's so difficult, isn't it? And it's sad, because I love the bloke. But ultimately, I think the way we played in that second half, as you say, just would not have happened if we didn't have the number of sort of ball comfortable midfielders on the pitch to create these sort of circumstances. And also, I think, as we've already alluded to, a lot of our success was down to being able to press quite aggressively and quite effectively and limit Liverpool. I mean, we went away to Anfield and kind of forced Liverpool to play the long ball. Against Klopp, maybe that would have been more expected, because they were quite keen to be direct. But I think the one thing Arne Slot has come in and done is really impose a bit more control, a bit more possession, a bit more sort of Cruyffian, I guess, if you want to look at the Dutch influence, and to sort of strip them back to basics and back to an older version of themselves is testament to how effective our game plan was executed. And I think a lot of that is to do with the fact that we were able to press, but also able to control.
Would have been executed if we defended the long balls better, I should clarify.
Yeah.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Continue.
And yeah, I don't think either of those sort of contributing factors work as well if Souček's on the pitch. I think, it's a fact, really. It's a fact. We wouldn't be able to circulate in the way that we did, and we wouldn't have been able to press aggressively because he doesn't move as quickly as someone like Paquetá or Salah.
You don't have to qualify it. It's a fact. Yeah. It just doesn't happen. The mobility to press, we've seen it in recent weeks when we've tried to play 5-3-2 and have him jump to the fullbacks. It's not worked.
Yeah, it doesn't work. And yeah, it's an important question, but I think I would imagine that, and the way that Graham Potter has spoken post-game, I get the feeling that 45 minutes is the level. That's what he's aspiring to do week in, week out. And if that is the gold standard, or maybe the floor, who knows? Maybe that's the floor. It's the first time we've seen it, and I guess he'd hope that he can build from there as well. And either way, if that's what we're trying to replicate week in, week out, then you can't really see a place for Souček. And I guess the question then is, how do you get what he offers without him being on the pitch? And I guess it kind of wraps around to what we were talking about having a focal point 9, right? Like, Souček's so good at crashing the opposition box and arriving on balls that are cut into the edge of the box and slapping them in the back of the net. And that's probably been so pronounced because of an absence of an actual number 9 for so long. It's been him that stepped up and done those things that a number 9 does. He's often the guy we look to for the long ball. We push him further upfield than maybe anyone would do of a central midfielder because of what he's good at. But as soon as you introduce a number 9 that can do all those things, that can get on the end of those chances that Souček often arrives on, that can get onto the end of those long balls when we need to play directly, then you've kind of alleviated a lot of the issues that existed because we didn't have a number 9 that Souček had to step up and deliver on. And then it's just, well, you need to find a centre-back or another player that can just defend the box as well as he can. It's not super easy, but I think then it becomes less of a gaping hole and more of a, well, can we just find one more player that can add a little bit of steel in defence when we're defending corners? And I think you can. Yeah, it's a goalkeeper who's more assertive off his line.
That's exactly what we're looking for. We're looking for a goalkeeper who communicates better and comes off his line.
Or someone who, like, as we said earlier, Antonio is a massive loss in those moments because of what a nuisance he is. It doesn't have to be someone that's a massive unit. It just needs to be someone who's disciplined and can do a role so that then someone can step into the Souček role. Because at the minute you've got moving pieces and people doing things that maybe you'd rather than be doing something else, but because no one can do the thing that Antonio did, you've then got someone else doing it. So I think, you just need to find that, and I think you can address the other things in terms of at the other end of the pitch by just finding that number 9, whether it's Füllkrug or whether it's someone in the summer, because Füllkrug isn't deemed to be reliable enough to start week in, week out. But I think it's clear in the minutes that we've seen that someone of that mould kind of brings the whole team together. So I think it's crucial that we find that, whether it's just getting him fit, like you say, giving him a good pre-season, or going out and finding someone that can do what Füllkrug does.
And there's another side to that debate as well that we should express, which is, as much value in assessing things and saying, well, the guy that helps you win more by being so effective in the boxes where ultimately you score goals and you stop goals going in is too important, is too much of a useful tool. Especially if they're able to cope and play well in games consistently in the Premier League, as Souček does so regularly. I mean, rarely drops below a 6 out of 10. Most often he is a 7 out of 10 because in the things that he does, the things that he brings to the team, he executes almost always at a high level for the team. He's incredibly consistent in those elements, and therefore finding a way to extract those levels and continue to get that from him could be a really important focus. I think the difference here, and this is a really nice way to kind of oppose where we were with David Moyes and perhaps where we're heading with Graham Potter, is that under Moyes had a structure that was so good to allowing individuals who had things that they did individually in a really dominant fashion, where maybe they weren't quite at the level of other Premier League players across the board, across all of the areas that other players in their position might stand out. They just really stood out at certain elements. I think Craig Dawson was a really good example of that. I think Kurt Zouma was another really impressive example of that. And I think actually, although these were more rounded players who had more to their game and did so much more for the team, Cresswell and Sofal were really, Sofal particularly, really good examples of that. Souček, another, and Mikel Antonio in many respects as well, performing the way that he did up front and finding a way to create situations where the one thing he did at this just insane level, which was roll wide and beat a centre-back out wide, you just created that as much as you possibly could. That's a much harder set of conditions to create when you're trying to play the way that Potter wants to play, when the responsibility to retain possession, to circulate possession exists at the team level, not just in certain individuals. You're not just looking to, we'll pass to Aaron Cresswell and he'll pass to Paquetá and we'll see how many passes we can maintain, and then very much the same with Emerson to Paquetá. It's now, no, that job is for everyone. Everyone needs to be capable of taking the ball under pressure. Everyone needs to be capable of breaking a line. Everyone needs to be press resistant, and everyone needs to show the same quality and aggression in the press. And that maybe makes it a little bit more difficult than it was years ago to get the maximum level at minimal cost to the team out of players that excel in more narrow areas of the game.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And you can see it with Moyes at Everton now, right? The conditions that he's created there for the likes of Beto and Iliman Ndiaye and stuff like that.
This is why he's an incredible manager. He does this at the highest level. There are a few better at doing that thing.
Yeah. No, it's completely true. It's probably also the reason why he always goes off for UEFA stuff to do the scouting for players and stuff, because he can see people's strengths almost instantly and find out how to get them firing on all cylinders in those key areas very quickly. So yeah, credit to him. I suppose the only, very conscious of time, but it just dawned on me, some listeners might be thinking, well, if we're going to have three midfielders on the pitch, is there a possibility where you can put Souček at the base in the role that Ward-Prowse is doing, because it's just about security and simple side-to-side passing and covering lanes, and maybe Souček doesn't get glided by as much as Ward-Prowse does, because that's one of his biggest strengths, is reading that space. I guess I can probably answer the question on your behalf, but I'm assuming it's that press resistance note that you raised. It's about being so comfortable to receive the ball. You see it in the second half, right? Soler, Paquetá and Ward-Prowse constantly showing for the ball. Is that
It's some of that, but it's actually more, for me, it's about moving into the right places. It's actually where you show and how you show and the kind of runs that you make to show, so that you can get on the ball all the time. Yeah. I think it's, Souček actually is really, impressive across the league for like miscontrols and dispossessions. He does rarely actually lose the ball under pressure. He just doesn't have the instincts to receive at the rate of other midfielders. He doesn't show in the same way with the same speed and the same, he just doesn't have the same kind of ability to move his body quickly into positions that allow him to receive the ball in better areas or bounce it back into centre backs. He's a taller, lankier, slower player that it makes that job harder for him to just kind of buzz about and move around this sort of 20-yard zone at speed and constantly be taking and receiving and playing back at really high rates. It's just not really in his makeup.
There you go. Question answered. That'll do. Yeah,
it presents a really interesting question for how you look at building the squad going forward, and how you
keep him around for vibes. Just keep him around for vibes. He's like a good little plan B option to have, but it depends.
Don't address it now. We've got another podcast to go. Come and join us on Extra Time, patreon.com/Analytics United. First 7 days free. We hope to see you there, and we will be discussing this in more depth with Darcy, who will be joining us over there, and also some of those individual performances that we didn't get to speak about here, including two really that we have barely spoken about on the main pod that I think are really worth talking about at length. Two really hugely impressive individual performances from players in the West Ham team. So look forward to seeing you over there, and until next time, come on you lines.